Hello and welcome. You're listening to the audio presentation of She Came From Nowhere, the novelization of a 13-book series. It is the story of a secret agent from a multiversal government agency discovering the location of God and taking action to kill her. The series covers the war between gods and mortals who create and destroy themselves and their worlds. The novels are written and performed by Caleb Morazi. If you would like to support the creation of this series and add input of your own, swing by patreon.com/shecamefromnowhere to become a secret agent. You'll get access to the entire novel, new series chapters as they become available, and audio from each. Link in the description. And now, enjoy Chapter 12, Adrift. 1. The Old One's presence had an immediate effect on everyone except Sequi, driving out their rational thoughts and giving rise to their animal instincts. Triton, a seasoned leader among his people, went into a murderous rage, killing without a plan. Sakan stopped fighting, overwhelmed by all the reality she was seeing, every decision and the repercussions of her choices spiraling away from her in every direction. In all the world she'd taken control in one form or another, and in every instant she'd drawn reality's fabric, always awakening the Old One. She watched in horror as it slaughtered populations or caused them to slaughter themselves, leaving every planet barren. Sakan wanted to stop the destruction, trying to save at least one world from the terrible fate, but every change caused the madness to be released even earlier. Suddenly she understood what Sequi had been trying to show all the versions of her all along. The harder she fought to make the worlds behave, the more the nature rebelled. It really couldn't even help itself. There were millions of tiny factors that were at play. To upset one was to start an unfathomable, cascading chain reaction, a tsunami forming from the flapping of a butterfly's wings. So Sakan decided to just let go. Sequi caught the Imogen falling from the sky and landed on the amalgam's back as it bobbed in the water. "Rest now, my sweet child," she says. "You've seen enough." With the bird-like creatures on the run, Triton turns his attention to the Old One, sensing it as the source of confusion. He flies for its beady eyes over its tentacled mouth, attacking it madly. He couldn't win. He only hoped to distract it from his daughter. 2. As a central agent, Certain had glass-cubed and erasered anyone who stood in his way. He forgot them, speed bumps on his way to the top. Forgotten them until now, that is, each of their faces swimming before his eyes as if they were in the air with him. If he had known he'd be trapped in a world that he had told a sneeze-jellian scientist to create, he wouldn't have been so fast to off him when he started asking questions. Inside their mind, Triton finally saw everything Certain had done, and, as an angel who honored justice, he couldn't allow such a vile creature to live. He didn't want the Imogen to see what he was doing, and he had to keep from taking control back. He had to act quickly while Certain was distracted by the ghosts who haunted him. He was aware that turning the flaming sword on himself was going to be both painful and the end of his life, but he didn't care. Destroying evil is always a worthy sacrifice. His people wouldn't even know about his death, but he would know that it was honorable. From the outside, the angel's flight path looked insane. In truth, it was. Two minds fought for control while trying to avoid getting killed, wrestling over their sword. It tumbles through the air, flames whipping around the blade as it picks up speed. Certain's voice yells out in triumph from Triton's mouth, but it quickly turns to shock as they turn upside down, diving toward the water, the angel wanting to drown himself. They hurl their sword on their deliberate descent, hitting the water moments before the angel's weapon plunges into the amalgam. A hole forms and the great beast folds in on itself, the mind link screaming from its many mouths as it slowly crumples. Triton's head breaks the water's surface as Ever desperately tries to saw off parts of the amalgam that they can use. "I didn't mean to become who I was," Certain gasps. With the world still spinning around her, Sakan rises unsteadily from the tiny piece of the amalgam before lowering herself onto Triton's head, the two of them sinking beneath the waves. She flaps her wings to remain above the water, the angel's body thrashing until it finally sinks out of sight. The force of the Old One's madness hits them all stronger. Sakan can see that every decision she made has led her to this place. Her uncle's power was drawn from an ancient darkness that she was put in place to stop. On some worlds, it was early, but on others, she waited until now. High in the sky, Triton is batted away by enormous hands like a minuscule bug. When he persists, the Old One smashes the illic before brushing his guts from his hands. Wharton lands with Griffin held at arm's length, the wolf-faced agent clawing and scratching at him in his struggle to get free. "Where's Marilyn?" the first rank asks, as the old one bellows its ancient language, its wings making waves as it flies at them. In Ever's mind, it suddenly makes sense. The old one's tentacled face looms over them. There was no way out of this, and he, like the old one, was trapped in a broken world of abject terror. The reprieve he could find on his tiny chunk of rotting flesh could only be temporary. All roads lead to the same fate in every instance. What came next was only silence, and he wanted nothing more than to be wrapped in its embrace. With his arms raised, Ever chanted the old one's language back to it, realizing they were alike, the two of them desiring the end, and together they would bring it on them. Wharton tries to shake him out of his trance, the world beginning to ripple around them. Ever snarls at the Illic, "Get your hands off me. Thulu is here to make us all free. Once we're released from these bodies, we will soar through the stars, becoming gods." "You'll crush me. You'll crush everything," Sequi says. "There's nothing beyond me. I am all things." But Ever won't listen. He shoves Wharton away, continuing the chant in an ancient language he never learned, the old one gleefully watching from above. Without knowing it, Sakan had wanted to provoke the old one. She rose to its tentacled face, speaking her own dark language, which was much like its own. Seeing this, Ever gave an exultant shout, and the world stopped shaking. She is the one foretold to bring the end of all things. He and Griffin laugh like maniacs, dancing together in a chaotic way that rocks the slab of flesh. Wharton and Sequi take to the air, throwing off the weight of the raft, and it flips, throwing the two mad agents into the sea. They resurface a few moments later, laughing so hard they have trouble swimming. 3. "Should we stop her?" Wharton asks Sequi. The Imogen shakes her head. "I'm hoping your Prime Leader understands her choices hold the world in balance." Sakan flies closer to the old one, and it tenses, ready for an attack, but it immediately relaxes, letting the Illic land on its shoulder, the two conversing conspiratorially. "We've got to keep them off our raft," Ever says to Griffin, nodding to Sequi and Wharton, after climbing into the amalgam's gore. "We don't want their high-mindedness to get us into more of a mess. Hopefully, they'll get exhausted and just drop." "Why wait for them to get tired?" Griffin asks, drawing his flesh weapon. "We can take them out now." He fires teeth at the winged pair as Ever lines up his tiny gun. Sequi weaves through the air with Wharton, getting too close to the Illic in one of their passes, brushing his wings. He tumbles into Ever's shot. The Illic takes the hit meant for her, vaporizing one of his wings. He careens toward the water. "I'm sorry," Sequi says loud enough for him to hear. "It's not what I want, but it's where we are now based on our decisions, and it's either going to be you or me at this point." Wharton claws his way onto the leftover hunk of the amalgam, exhausted from staying awake over the long journey. Whenever came at him with the chainsaw, he only reacted, breaking the machine off the man's arm. "You can't hurt me now," he says. "You see, this is how they behave when complete freedom is granted to them," the old one says to Sakan, watching the little creatures fight each other on their tiny raft. Despite the fact that he was bleeding profusely, Ever lunges at Wharton, firing his tiny weapon at the Illic. While being slightly off balance from his missing wing, Wharton still dodges effectively, curling into a roll that launches him clawed feet first at the man, hitting him squarely in the chest. The leap and subsequent landing rocks the raft so hard it flips again, throwing all three of them into the water. No one is laughing as they resurface. Ever swimming to Wharton and trying to push him underwater. "You just had to bring him to the goat, didn't you?" he shouts, getting clawed across the face. "You couldn't have done your duty as an agent and killed the traitor for mutiny." The chainsaw roars as Griffin leaps from the water, plunging it into Wharton's neck. The Illic's dark blood sprays everywhere, clouding the water. "You brought this on yourself," Ever yells. "You didn't have to interfere with a central operation. You could have quietly lived on your own world to a ripe old age, dying in your sleep, but you had to become a hero in your own story." The Illic's claws rake deep across Griffin's face as well, but he doesn't stop the chainsaw. "We've got news for you. This is my story. I'm the hero. I will survive long after you are all gone." Wharton stops fighting, then he sinks. Ever and Griffin swimming back to the amalgam, climbing on the raft. Sakan nods, won over by the old one's words. She knew what she had to do. As she bends reality, the sea turns from water to fire, cooking the floating creatures. Exhausted, the agents lay on the amalgam, its flesh cooking. "I want out of here, Griff. This is the worst mission we've ever been on. I don't want to die here." "We're not dying here," Griffin says. "We're survivors. Backup is coming for us." Sequi drops onto a raft, nearly throwing them all into the flaming sea. "She's fallen for his lies just like you all did," she says, "but she has the power to make things worse." Why not stop her, Griffin says, pointing his weapon. Your life's also at stake. Griffin, it's remarkable how much your life has changed you, Sukui says. Once you had tried to convince Central of my goodness, and now you have nothing but doubt. He lowers his gun. I've seen too much. Every world is broken, and you allow it. You act as if you're helpless like us, Ever says between sharp intakes of breath, holding the bleeding stump of his broken arm. Yet you warned me that ending you would end everything. You can't be both. Either you're all-powerful or you're not. If you want to stop her, it's time to strike, the old one says to Sakan, putting pictures in her mind of unimaginable horrors that she unleashes onto their reality. He didn't say it in so many words, but he gave Sakan the impression that if she could destroy the Imogen, that she could become the all-ruling, powerful one herself. 4. Ever stood on their raft, the heat rising as the sky splits, orbs surrounded by swirling metal shards glittering above them. I will not submit, he hollers up at them defiantly. Those who will not bow to our might must be made to bow, the old one growls to Sakan, and the flaming sea grows rougher, rocking the tiny craft. Sukui stands, widening her stance and spreading her wings to create a balance that keeps them upright. Metal shards shoot from the orbs, missing them, but splashing fire, Sukui shifting her weight to avoid them. Ever laughs. You wanted to kill me, but you can't. Tear the universe apart and I will rise again. I am the unquenchable, the unstoppable one. Griffin grabs him as they are almost overturned by the waves. Would you stop provoking them, he hisses. Have you no respect for beings who are so far above you? A scorching wind hits them, swarms of fungal insects with antenna-covered faces sweeping in the horizon. Would you rather die, cowering in fear, or defiant, Ever asks. The orbs blast more shards, and Sukui doesn't move fast enough to avoid them. The metal pierces her body and legs, pinning her to the raft. Griffin moves to help free her, but the Imogen shakes her head. I wanted them for more stability, she gasps. Her wings raise. Sukui leans into the wind, picking up speed as they climb slopes of fire and hurtle down the other side. Ever laughs, the sound of a completely unhinged mind. I know you wouldn't let us die out here. You've protected me my entire life. Above the old one, a massive creature of writhing tentacles spills across the sky from outer space. I protected you so you would acknowledge me, Sukui says. The tentacles of the massive creature blocks out everything above them from horizon to horizon as it nears, the flaming sea becoming more chaotic as it's pulled towards the sky. But I acknowledge you now, Everlast. Isn't that enough to do something? You recognize that I'm over the entire complexity of the multiverse, she asks. Of course, he laughs. I think that's more than obvious, don't you? With the raft now nothing more than charred leather, Sukui flaps her wings, lifting them into the air. She grimaces in pain, the metal shards digging into her flesh. The fungal insects swarm all around them, and the orbs fill the dark sky with more shards. While Griffin moves to Sukui, Ever steps to the edge, raising his stump defiantly to the old one. Give us your best shot, squid face. We have your maker behind us. 5. The wolf-faced agent stares up at the tentacles in the sky as they grow larger, overwhelmed by his utter smallness. He sinks to the raft, cowering at Sukui's feet. I want to know how you don't completely freeze up knowing that all of this exists out here. I accept everything as it is. Not how I think it should be, Sukui says as she strains to avoid the fungal insects and approaching orbs. I can see its infinite varieties, but you all dress yourselves up with technology, status, or traditions to hide your powerlessness. The weight of his life choices crushed him. In the years he battled the spreading Ferb tech, the thousands of worlds he had had to put to death, the millions of agents who had admired him, following his every command. It hadn't started out that way, but it made him feel very powerful to hold the fate of the universes in his paws. He could see now it was all just a distraction from eternity's yawning maw. He'd brought this on himself, he realized. The first law of Cleodynamics was the anti-vacuum. Any change you make in one world ripples out into all others. No one escapes the repercussions of their behavior. His choice to remove Sukui from her perch in the rift, no matter how well-meaning, only brought destruction on the multiverse. Now, he was so numb that he couldn't even be scared, simply accepting his fate. I want you to turn it back, he says, surprising himself as his unconscious desire slips out. I know you can. Everyone with a sliver of your power can alter everything. I can, and I will, she says. But it's never going to happen the way you think. He looks up into space and sees the outline of the huge tentacled creature as it slowly approaches the planet, the orbs and the fungal insects filling the sky. He realizes that it may be his fault that he's here, but the Imogen still dreamt it all up. The old one looks up in horror at the tentacled sky. "Little creature," he whispers in his dark tongue, "what have you done? Ithia here? Your power outreaches your knowledge." "She won't allow herself to be destroyed," Sagan says hollowly. "She loves us too much, and she's just giving us a chance to come back to her." They look laughs, but there's no joy, only emptiness. "I'm pushing her into action. She's too passive to be a leader I can believe in. When she does, we'll see her true might, then I'll decide if she's worth following. And don't worry, she'll come through. She's given us plenty of chances before." A fanciful tune cuts through the air, causing the orbs and fungal instincts to fall into a stupor as Cookie, the satyr, swoops in on the back of a Baphomet. "That's enough that you wouldn't destroy my business. Now you're destroying my world too." His steed speaks, looking at the charred raft. So many brilliant minds destroyed by one act of irrationality. One of the multiverse's greatest minds, nothing but skin. "You'd better push her into showing her strength then, little one. If those interlopers guide her through the Pixin doorway, she'll leave us to our own destruction." Cookie guides Sequoia through the orbs and fungal swarm on the back of his Baphomet towards an island that appears as just a dot on the horizon under the newly cresting sun. Before them, an inky darkness 10 times larger than the old one rises, dripping from the flaming sea. Its presence wakes the orbs and the fungal instincts from their slumber as it spreads its rotting bat wings to reveal the winged humanoid suckling at its multitude of breasts. They explode silently into the sky, pursuing the Imogen and her companions. Griffin holds his arm out to Sequoia, saying, "Slash me. The night gaunts can't resist the smell of blood." She swipes at him, and the wolf-faced agent drips over the side. Cookie leads the way for the Illic on his Baphomet, the pan flute to his lips. The pursuing creatures gain on them, losing focus but immediately regaining it once the satyr takes a breath. "I want you to get far away from here and never come back." Looking back at the monstrosities pursuing them, Griffin shakes his head. "After spending a lifetime eradicating the Furbtech, I actually wish I had one now. A whole infestation of them. Even these brutes couldn't resist them. No species could, no matter how dark the Hell World or how deep their planetary divides, they couldn't resist." Sequoia smiles through the strain. "Why do you think I allowed them to exist?" "I want her to show us the type of creator she is," Sagan says to the old one in their dark tongue. The planet shudders under Ithia-Ah's globe-encompassing tentacles. Everett looks up at the arm blocking the way to the island and everything catching up to them. The air shimmers around them. "I'm almost jealous of you all," he says. "For you, it will all be over in a fraction of a second, but life and its struggles will go on for me." The universe implodes. But it was different this time. The painful, crushing squeeze was there and the terror of billions of deaths, but this time he understood everything. He understood from Certain's limited perspective that things the one over all didn't just seem fair or make any sense. In many regards, it seemed downright cold. It made sense that when the Illics discovered their ability to bend reality, that they'd wanted to make their world and all realities safe. They needed a future for their nation and their families. The one who was remarkably cruel and had to be removed. As a warrior, Certain knew you couldn't wait for your enemy to come and destroy you. You had to foresee their attack and go on the offensive. So when he located the Imogen's homeworld, he knew he had to make his move, and he went for the coup de grace. It was from that timeless space that Ever gave Certain the idea to hibernate in the morgue and one to take over the CIB director's mind, sending Griffin after Sequoia. From his vantage point, Ever understood Certain's thinking that releasing the Furbtech was best and Sequoia's amusement at getting such a powerful asset. He could see her whole plan unfolding, even him being placed in a situation where he could destroy everything. No details, big or small, escaped her, nothing that she couldn't turn around for her own good. Since time was meaningless here, he waited. The Imogen peered out of the eyes of Ever and every living creature across the multiverse, ecstatic over their births and deaths. To her, it was all incredibly beautiful. The man who was no more understood why she allowed the Furbtech to be unleashed on the multiverse, even while she was hunted. She wanted the worlds to experience space-time the way that she did, holistically. To her, there's no division of things. Even in its fractured state, it was all just a big ball of stuff. However, since the idea was so foreign, offensive even to thinking creatures, they rejected the Imogen's gift to them. Sequi had marveled at Certain's resilience on Illic. She reached out to him in his pain and suffering, admiring his ability to survive. She didn't back off when she saw his hatred grow. Instead, she stayed at a constant presence in his mind, so he'd come to her. She guided Griffin's life, too. She made sure that he met the Central Agents who brought him into the Bureau and met Sarah Kay, arranging for him to be free to come to Nults of One. Certain believed he was lucky, or on days when he was feeling particularly delusional, that he was incredibly a skilled mastermind, manipulating people into giving him what he needed to succeed, but nothing was further from the truth. The Imogen guided his every step, stacking the deck in his favor, influencing the minds of those around him, blinding the eyes of his enemies. She could see the drive in him and fostered it, sharpening him like a spearhead aimed directly at herself. He thought he knew her, but when he finally uncovered her power, he played right into her hand, unleashing the device she'd been building in a forgotten laboratory of an out-of-the-way sub-basement. Rain was the hardest to get to Central, being from a gas giant. No sneeze Jellian wants to leave their world. It wasn't suited for them. But he was the only capable mind. The man's, Ellen Grobley, was easier. She, like the Illic, was so oppressed that she was looking for any means of escape. She was set up to cause Certain to flee as her resentful anger boiled over, leaving the Furbtech unleashed and geared to spread. Frantically, Ever realizes he's made all the wrong decisions in his life, striving in his non-existence to finally help Sequi succeed. Her plan was meticulous. It was unbothered by their mistakes. It constantly grew towards its final goal. He had spent the majority of his life fighting against the Imogen's goodness. Even to the end, he only thought about his own self-preservation, but now he sees his self-destruction served her. The Old One, who had been around since the birth of his universe, finally recognized who Sequi was, and in the eternal instant, he inclined his tentacled head toward her. 6. Griffin's eyes open in horror as he finds himself in Ahael's Furbtech farm. Facing the worst mistake of his life in the light of what he knew now, he told himself he'd done the right thing, but he knew in his heart he was only trying to ease his guilty conscience. Legimir breezes through the door in his traditional Jelvin robes. "The Ancestral Mother sent me for you," he says, clearly glad to be living in his final moments in his right mind. Inwardly, Griffin groaned. Would she demand more from him even so late? The wolf-faced agent's Furbtech chirps at him, and he reflexively picks it up before following the Jelvin. He didn't even want to, but he was immediately connected to everything in the mind link again. After the lifetime of hurt and loneliness, it felt nice to be floating among the thoughts of everyone else. They directed him, encouraged him. They were aware of his building anxiety and spoke gentle words to him like, surrender. The burden of having to protect and defend himself against the unending assault of the world finally broke him. As Griffin entered the darkened conference rooms, he fell to his knees, sobbing. "Please, whatever you need from me, I'm willing, but please just give me rest. I've given everything. I've turned my world and countless others over to you. I've turned my world and countless others over to you. Take what you need from me, but please, I'm begging you, give me rest." "No need to beg, Mr. Burness," a voice says from the shadows, Sequi stepping out in traditional Jelvin garb. "You've already reached your rest. No more is required." "Please forgive me, I've let you down," he says quietly, and she nods her head at him. The Imogen crosses to him, putting her clawed hand on his head. "You are forgiven." The agent weeps, his wolfish features melting away. "I've wasted my life in defiance of you," he says. "I could have spent all my time in your goodness, and I missed out." 7. Ever was being ingested by Perotio when Sequi found him. "You want help?" A weaker being would have begged her, but he grunted. "Yeah, no, I'll be alright." The Imogen sits down next to the tree and its young branches creep toward her. "This isn't where you expected to end up, was it? Don't worry. I'm going to be here with you. Always have been. Everything you've ever experienced, I've been there for." He laughs mockingly through his pain. "Oh yeah? You've been with me the whole time? What about when the meteor destroyed my planet's atmosphere? Were you there then? When everything was suffocated within minutes? Were you there when I had my identity ripped away, when I was inducted into the Mind Link? If so, then get away. You've never helped me. I can't imagine you start being any kind of help now." "There'll be no more escapes, Mr. Wolfrey," Sequi says as Ever tries to fight the Perotio's sedation. "There are no other worlds to leap to. I'm your final opportunity." Sequoia snuggles up to the tree's trunk, whispering to the young branches, encouraging them to wrap her tightly. You can't hurt me, loves. I'm here to feed you. Take all you need. I have more to give you than you could ever take from me in your entire life. Even as their consciousnesses merged with the grove, Ever continued to resist the melding, and he succeeded at keeping himself distant even as his body was dissolved. He could resist for an eternity if he had to. She couldn't force him to change. I want out, his mind screamed into the unending silence, but didn't cause a ripple. Nothing around him vibrated or trembled. His power to crush the universe was gone. His disembodied mind lost at the silent place. He could wait for eternity if he had to. He'd find a way out. He always did. He didn't care what Imogen thought she knew. She'd never been there for him. He'd always had to look out for himself. If he had to wait, he would wait. His world-crushing power had to come to him suddenly. Surely something else equally powerful would come his way. All he had to do was simply wait. Nestled in the Perocia's heart, Sequoia connected with the grove, the trees around it, and everything they touched. She became one with them, sorrowfully watching the man who kept himself isolated, missing out on the benefits of interconnectedness. In that timeless place there was no movement, no escape from one's choices. Although the Imogen didn't like where the man had got himself, she let him pick his fate. 8. Sakan led slaves out of the underground Menasker city and onto the planet's surface. As the Illic took to the skies, their former master's size wouldn't be an advantage. Her uncle had taken a stand and was dealt with, but, unlike the others, his disappearance inspired them to take a stand. They may die, but they would die in solidarity. I want you to know, Wharton says as he flies behind her, this better not be a ruse concocted between you and certain. It'd be inspiring, but you'll lose support after. No, Rue, Sakan smiled sadly. His sacrifice was the final blow for all of us. Grafon burst out of the underground vent with the huge hands grabbing after him. I just barely escaped the younger Illic pants. You can't say the same for others, though. They land among a flock of Illic at the entrance of a cavern, preparing themselves for an assault when another, very similar-looking creature crashes into their midst. What do you think you're doing here? Sakan growls at her. We have no need for your help. Sequoia gets to her feet, flicking the dust from her wings. This moment is more important than you know. It was/is your choices here that define the outcome of your life. Wharton raises a clawed hand. She came from nowhere, he says to Sakan. We shouldn't trust her. Everyone we know came from the underground. Look at her skin. She's been living in the sun. She could be working with them, only here to confuse us. The Illic shakes her head, suddenly realizing. She came because I needed her to prove to me what type of leader she is. So she's here, doing it beyond reason. Fine, as long as you stay out of the way, Orton says. I don't need to look after anyone. More Illic swarm to the location as the sound of rumbling is heard deep within the earth. We are here to prove we are the dominant species on this planet. Our oppression has gone on long enough. The creatures flock together by instinct, their numbers growing more and more as the rumbling increased below. None of you are my responsibility, Wharton shouts over the hubbub. We're all fighting for the same cause, but it'll be no good to you if I have to carry your weight with my own. Each of you has to look after yourselves in your own personal fight if any of us is to survive. Instead of coming out of the Menisker's mouth, the Menisker come up directly below the flock of Illic. Many are caught completely off guard as huge hands reach up, crushing them as they pull them down into the earth. The winged creatures that remained took to the air, dive-bombing their oppressors as they clawed their way out of the dirt. Despite not wanting to be their leader, many of the Illic took their cues from Wharton, rising when he rose and diving when he dove, as he was more quickly spotted their enemies' weaknesses, decisively exploiting it to their advantage. There would have been a glancing blow for one, but so many claws and fangs made their attacks deadly. To her horror, Sakan could see that, despite their best efforts, they were overpowered. They were all going to die. The Menisker were going to beat them into the dust. The tide was turning, and Wharton could feel it, but he didn't want the others to know they were doomed. He had spent countless nights dreaming of what it'd be like to be soaring free among the clouds. If they were going out, this would be their last memories. Conflict with your enemies is a zero-sum game, Sequoia says, time slowing as she stumbles through the combatants. Eventually, both sides grind each other into dust. Maybe during the first conflict, sometimes over generations, but no one wins over a long enough time frame. I've seen it happen on an infinite number of worlds. If you keep leading your people like this, it happens here too, and all across the entire multiverse. The future Prime Leader watched with pride as Goofy Gerfon leads a squadron of Illic into a cluster of Menisker, claws out, willing to lose it all if that's what it took. In slow motion, Sakan can see Wharton narrowly avoiding a Menisker trap by the slimmest margin. The others behind him were not so lucky. From his vantage point in the air, he observes the battlefield's carnage, steeling himself to the situation's futility. She couldn't allow her uncle's sacrifice to be nothing. Maybe they wouldn't win today, but they had to win. She broke off mountaintops, creating a haven in the sky. I can't believe you think we should live like this, Sakan says to Sequi. We can defeat them, and we will. Our enemies must be punished, and we will never submit. 9. Send me after it, Terrence says to Juan Serra. I want to see the anomaly firsthand and bring it back to study, he says quickly. I don't doubt that I can retrieve it. Serra clears his throat, looking past the agent's excitement. We're switching up on our approach. Once it breached its own containment, it became too dangerous and must be destroyed. We're seeing multiple, unprecedented ripples all throughout the rogue. Certain felt Terrence psychically probe him. He knew the agent could break his cover, but he remained calm, and the agent finally backed down with an enigmatic grunt. Sir, Terrence says, standing, it will be done exactly as you say it should be. Knew I could count on you, Sir says. The agent nods, heading out the door. Finally, someone who could do something about the situation, the director mutters. The psychic agent knew a fraud when he saw one. He'd seen strange things at the Bureau, but this was the strangest. His next moves had to be played close to the chest. The Imogen would get away, but just barely. Whatever she was disrupting was better. Suddenly the multiverse opened and Certain saw all of his lives. The detective, the pirate, the emperor, the professor, all wanting what she had. The power to choose their fate. When Terrence saw Sequi for the first time on Savannah was when he knew he had to serve her. He could see her thoughts, and everything about her was good. She turned even the evil of others toward their good, and even loved those that tried to destroy her. Knowing what people thought and felt always made Terrence feel icky, no matter how good they seemed on the outside, but her, wow. She was the essence of goodness. 10. Tetraserini had Duplug Singh cornered. The mind link spread over Yama. Their magic was fading, but the dingo was unaffected. The Duke disappeared under the fury of his opponent's fire. Tetraserini wanted to hurt him for the torment he had suffered. Lobsane's magic was so integrated into his city that when he burst into flames, it did too, and the unexpectedly burning city made the dingo laugh like he hadn't in a long time. Tetraserini couldn't quite explain how he knew what was happening, but he could feel the branches of his many lives being trimmed off, the leftover potential power from each one pouring into him. In very close iterations, the Dukes were winning, and it was him being killed, but here it was him who was coming out on top. He is going to be the one that got to see Sequi again, but he is going to succeed where all the other versions of him would not. He felt bad for them, but also knew that they were giving their lives intentionally so at least one of them would make it back to her. The energy pouring into Tetraserini drew attention of the other Dukes, and he found himself being surrounded by others who came from all over to aid Lobsang. Their city burning, people rushed from their houses, heading for the wilderness, but when they saw the dingo surrounded by Dukes who tortured him, they fell on them, helping Tetraserini, their sheer numbers overcoming where magic had failed. By overthrowing the Dukes, Empress Pro 2 noticed the dingo, seeing him as more than a pet. But she didn't free him. Instead, she put him in charge of everything, answerable to her. Like the Dukes, he oppressed the people who to preserve his own life. Although it's not what he wanted. He ruled the same way he had run Savannah. The aggressive ones had their behavior externally modified, and the peaceable ones ruled. He sensed the Empress's nervousness, her magic waning even as Tetraserini brought peace to the last remaining free people on their planet, Ferbtech merging with all the rest of them. They could both feel their timelines collapsing on either side of them. She confided in him one day about how she was aware that her power was being leached by another one close to her, but she was unable to stop them. Please, my pet, go on my behalf. Get back the power that you know I deserve. He had never seen her so pathetic, and he couldn't believe he had lived in fear of her. He poured fire into her mind. With his newfound freedom, he wanted to leave Yama quickly. The multiverse, as if hearing him, split open. He walked into a rift, where he saw a winged creature. Time slowed, lightning leaping from the Sphinx's eyes. He knew he had died, but it didn't matter. He deserved it for the evil he had done, the people he had killed to escape. He reached her, though. As he was incinerated, he saw her with his own eyes. It was enough. 11. We're closed, Cookie shouts angrily, Connie pushing into the highest goat. Indefinitely by the look of it, Connie says, looking at the decaying restaurant. The satyr stands, squinting at her. And whose fault is that? He demands sourly. Her last memories were Certain's claws removing her head as she led her army against him, and yet here she was. She had never been in the goat, but she knew it and its owner. She sat down at the bar and Cookie glared at her. I told you. We're closed, he said, laying his hand on the blaster on his belt. Unless you're wanting trouble. Connie smiled at him, reaching inside her jacket, setting a glass cube on the counter. A glass cube that she hadn't realized she had until she reached for it. No trouble, she says. But seeing as this is the last instance of yourself, I'd be very careful. He doesn't lift his hand from the blaster, but grunts. What can I do for you? I wasn't looking forward to going through this alone, Connie says sheepishly. I could feel it coming. So I set up a place where we would be able to ride it out. You saying me and the goat exist because you were trying to prolong the collapse? She shrugs coyly, helping herself to the salty snacks left on the bar. More or less. I was hoping you'd be able to find some way to stop her. I made you smart, capable, powerful. You must be able to think of something. Some way to save yourself. The satyr finally takes his hand from the blaster, reaching out to squeeze Connie's. I'm sorry, lass. There's nothing to be done. All this here is just an afterglow. We stopped existing a long time ago, and our minds are just now trying to catch up to it.
End of Chapter 12. Thank you for listening to this audio presentation of She Came From Nowhere, a series novelization written and performed by Caleb Morazi. If you'd like to read more of this book, read chapters from the series, listen to audio, and further support the development of this project, please go to patreon.com/SheCameFromNowhere, link in the description. Please like, share, and subscribe this video. Until next time, we'll see you soon.